received, and so
This meeting is being recorded.
so happy to have everybody back here today. So we've got two sessions. So this first part here, we're starting with 8. So really discussing different modeling efforts in Canada and collaborations on working together to try to improve those capacities for ocean modeling in Canada. So without any further ado, I think let's jump right into it. First talk here from Yo-Yu Liu, BIO. So Yo-Yu, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Greg. And so good morning. I think it's good morning right now, and for everybody in Canada. And so this talk about the three oceans model, and a little bit of personal work, and also in the end I want to discuss our plan for ongoing work. Certainly, I ignore many people's names. This model is not from just start from scratch, and it's more like in the concept. I think with Greg and other many people, including Miopar and ArcNet, these kind of projects, and also always working with the Mercury Ocean International to develop the new ocean model for operational forecasting and also many other applications in Canada. And so I cannot put everybody's name on the first page.
Yo-Yu, we're seeing your this meeting is recorded message above your presentation. If you see that, can you click on the got it button?
I click on that, and but it should disappear now, right?
Nope, it's still there. Okay, so you need to get out.
I think it's only you, David.
I think it's you, yeah. I don't have it either.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry, apologies. Carry on.
Okay. A little overview for the basic scale ocean models in Canada, and I don't know how to get rid of the top part, but we based on various versions of the NUMO for the ocean part, and limit the CICE for the ice part, and some include the Basel chemistry, and some include coupling to the atmosphere module. So for North Atlantic, so there's a 112-degree version, and I developed BIO, the DFO. It's for hindcast and also for climate projection, and the Leon is a primary author for that. In Arctic, and there are various versions in DFO. I think also in ECCC now. I think about there. That from DFO iOS and West Coast and BIO, and with different resolution, different configuration. Some is the Basel chemistry, cover to atmosphere, and for regional climate projection. And for the Arctic and North Atlantic, certainly, there's a Paul Myers group in University of Alberta, and they have a 1/4 and 112-degree version called Anna. And with a version, some version of the Basel chemistry, and for hindcast, I think Paul did some for the climate projection. And the concept, I think, with the model we have called CREG, Canadian Regional, I have two versions, 1/4 degree and 112-degree version. I think three oceans, and I think first we realized to call it CREG extension, and so Canadian Regional extend to the North Pacific, and for operational one called REOPS, and it's developed by Concepts. It's doing forecasting on the ECCC now. So this version the 112-degree with the NUMO 3.6 with the CIS model, and for hindcast and short-term forecasting. So we create a similarly and version called NAPA North Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic. Is by my group DFO and collaborators at universities. So we use a NUMO 3.6 version and with a lame 2 or 3 CS model. So their 1/4 degree version is have a BGC component, and by university, also by West Coast DFO, and Jim Kirschin is working on the Basel chemistry on that part. And for hindcast, and also doing for climate projection, and that Eric Oliver does some climate projection. And we created a 112-degree version and tested, but not running seriously. And so this is the configuration for the three oceans. And the Pacific is cut from 45 degrees north and to Arctic, and North Atlantic at 26 degrees. and for both 1/4 degree and 1/12 degree version. And we also, the new version, it tested and moved the southern boundary in the Atlantic to 70 degree north and use vertically have 75 levels. And so hindcast, and I say mostly with 1/4 degree and evaluation with observations, and with collaborator carry out some analysis for understanding the ice and biochemical variations. And there's some paper published, and there's we learn a lot and running from experience from 1/4 degree model, and these are lessons will be helped to run in the 1/12 degree model. It's quite similar with the Paul Meyer's group approach. So they switch between 1/4 degree and 1/12 degree and to learn from each other. So in below, I just see quite a recent work with Eric Oliver and Jianmin Hu and Clark Richards, and comparison the flow from 1/4 degree hindcast with the DFO observation in the Bear Strait. Bear Strait is somewhere here. And we should note 1/4 degree had a spatial resolution about 12 kilometers in the CAA, and we only have 6 degrees across the Bear Strait. So the hindcast is from 1980 to the present. And so these are DFO observations in the Bear Strait and or some part called Lancaster Sound, and the more observations starting from 1998 and become real-time observatory in 2009. This is very important, the gateway from the Arctic to North Atlantic through the CAA. And from these more observations and derived volume and also freshwater fluxes, these are extensively used for model validation. And so many people in the world using this data set for validate their model. So I just give example for some people with in the States. So this morning, I took the picture from Peterson et al. 2012. I would call this the most comprehensive mooring setup during the 2001-2006. So have mooring at the south, central, and northern locations. And recently, there are less instrument across the strait. So when you estimate the fluxes, volume flux or freshwater flux, you must do from mooring, you must do interpolation, both horizontally and vertically to do the interpolation. So there's the issue here, right? So from this, you assume some flow structure when divide fluxes. So there's certainly their uncertainty or error can be introduced. So I guess our idea is how the models, certainly this flow can help by this model. And if the agreement is good, then we can move forward to guide the estimate of the observation. So how am I doing time? 8 minutes now? Or?
7 minutes left. You have 15 minutes left.
Okay, and so these are the observed flow. I focus on the flow. So I just this left panel from these are derived from the flow. This is kind of a data from the ADCP. And this is from the mean seasonal cycle. And for different layers, this is multi-climatology. And these are for the different, this southern station and the lower station, you can see some vertical shear. And this is summer season, and this is the winter season. So, so the conclusion from observation is the summer, there's a peak flow, larger shear in the vertical horizontal, and when in winter, there are weaker flow and horizontal, weaker flow and horizontal vertical shear in winter. And how compare with the 1/4 degree model? And so this is from the observation, we repeated here, and these are from the model. And so you can compare the line. We haven't put all the lines same color here before. So the conclusion here, comparison of the model also shows us a peak flow and larger shear in the vertical horizontal in summer, but overestimate speed. And in winter, and there's a weaker flow and horizontal shear consistent with observation, but there's a stronger flow at immediate depth and at 8 meter depth. And this is for our first run. So we tried several ways, and so we need to understand this model and why this difference in winter activity here in summer or winter. So in the large scale is certainly we can understand, and there's summer stronger flow, why there's stronger flow, why it's winter there's weaker flow, and there's less horizontal shear. And so this is summer, this is the winter. So you can certainly see some difference between summer and winter. And so, but we understand, and the intermediate flow and stronger flow in summer. I know is baroclinic is associated with the upward tilt of the picno. See the flows and the salinity and temperature, and you see certainly there's it's baroclinic component is the flow called intermediate depth. And so we do the tuning and reduce the run. If we increase the horizontal tracer diffusivity, and it doesn't help, but we add in James McWilliams, it helps. And so that's a difference. And I think is the okay, this is the first run. This is kind of called the improved run. You can see the intermediate flow is weaker. So eddy parameterization helps. And so the conclusion is here. And certainly the model have some skills, but it's not perfect. And tuning eddy parameterization and the quarter degree doesn't really resolve the middle scale eddies, and it helps. So these are lessons. And if from quarter degree we said okay, and we expect because 112 degree, if we run 112 degree, and there should be is less dependent on eddy parameterization, that would be better. And there certainly my colleague Yang Wu and Biao is working FECOM for the archipelago. And so if you control the boundary condition, and I think Dave Greenberg also did early work, so control well, and because we worry about large scale bias in the buffer and also downstream in the buff and bake, so they help. That's a conclusion. So now, and so we're start to think about what we plan for 112 degree hindcast. And this is recently, just last week, we got news from the DFO CISF. This project is funded for 3 years. We have 18 members from Canada and international to deliver hindcast from 1958 to present. And certainly the team has lots of expertise for model evaluation and to understand the forcing mechanisms. And we have contacted 30 users to develop biochemical applications and also boundary conditions for boundary scaling. So now we need time to seek advice for model setup. Okay, this is my last slide. And so model domain. The Pacific is here. If a better condition for self waves, if we keep here, then this part from the tropics, there are self waves. We need to have good boundary condition. Atlantic. So current version, we have version on the RIOPS have 26 degree north in the Casa Florida Strait, and whether we need to move further to south to 7 degree north. And the choice of model code. So we have version working NEMO 3.6, we live 3 now. And RIOPS is 3.6 with a CICE certain version. And NEMO now has a NEMO 4 with a new CSMOS CIQ. And Greg is our talk about, we're thinking about now option 4, but NEMO 4 plus CICE 6. And choice of vertical coordinate. And in NEMO 4, if we decide NEMO 4, then we can choose a Z coordinate or Z coordinate or hybrid and coordinate. So that's if we have a few minutes, I hope to get some advice from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there's 2 minutes left for questions. I think we can go ahead. See nothing in the chat right now. So I guess I can ask a question right away. So, so what do you think is the role of sea ice in the Northwest Passage?
Well, and you mean in terms of the flow field, right? So transport, and I would say, certainly have the flow. Sea ice will have the drag on the flow on top layer. I think there's certain impact, and so we need to evaluate the sea ice motion, and if we want to part. But I think the flow now, per degree is this flow. I was kind of surprising. It's baroclinic, and it's not barotropic. So if you're sea ice, I would say more like a surface, and it's less baroclinic effect. But we should evaluate the sea ice motion. There's a sea ice velocity measurement.
Yeah, thank you. Dave, is there any raised hand? I don't think.
Can I ask a question? This is Hailin.
Yeah, hi. Hi.
Yes. Hi, I missed the first part of your talk. When you talk about hindcast,
yeah,
are you still using the atmospheric forcing during the integration, or just use the initial condition?
Hi, thank you. I think there's somehow we have a in meteorology and oceanography, and we interpret high cast differently, and so I think the high cast in meteorology is more strict, and oceanographer we just say is a random model for historical, and it's not doing your type of high cast to test the forecasting skill. So yeah, we are going to run with open boundary condition and atmospheric realigned forcing. And I think some choices we're thinking about ERA5, but that is open. We haven't started work, so we work on a lot of advice for this. I think Greg is a part of the team. He will have some suggestions to me. Thank you, Hai.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. I think we should probably move on to the next talk. Yeah. So thanks, you.
Thank you.
So if you want to,
there's a question for you in the chat. So check that.
Yeah, so please continue the discussion in the chat. Yeah, I think that would be great. So next up we have Kyoko. Do you have your presentation ready?
Yes.
There we go. Okay, I can see your screen. You just put it in presentation mode. Perfect. Looks
okay.
Good. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Greg. So what I'm presenting today is the result of collaboration among many people, as shown here. We are working on developing a new coupled modeling system to study interactions among physical and biogeochemical processes in the Northwest Atlantic Ocean. This work is funded primarily by the Ocean Frontier Institute, and it's part of an OFI project to study the biological carbon pump in the Northwest Atlantic. The biological carbon pump refers to the process in which atmospheric carbon is captured at the ocean surface by primary production and then subsequently moved away from the ocean surface, either due to the sinking of particles or due to physical mixing and convection. And the Northwest Atlantic is an area that is highly productive biologically, so that this pump is highly active. And as we all know, this region is also affected by many physical processes. So our goal is to develop a coupled modeling system to better understand these processes, both individually and in relation to each other. So our modeling system consists of the physical component and the biogeochemical component. The physical component consists of the circulation model ROMs and the sea ice model size, which sends information about their variables to the biogeochemical module, which is a part of ROMs. And the biogeochemical module has been developed over the years by Katja Fennell's group, and it includes phytoplankton, zooplankton, detritus, and the nitrogen cycle. And within the physical module, the circulation model ROMs and size exchange information about their respective variables. Our model domain covers the area from just south of Cape Hatteras to the southern part of Baffin Bay. The horizontal resolution ranges from about 8 kilometers in the south to about 2 kilometers in the north. There are 40 terrain following layers in the vertical. And for the inputs, we are using ERA5 reanalysis for the atmosphere, GLORIS reanalysis for the ocean initial conditions, and ocean and ice lateral boundary input. We are using the TPXO global model for tidal forcing. And for river discharge, we are using various public sources. And for freshwater flux due to ice melt, we are using, this is mainly from Greenland and Baffin Bay. We are using the data set of Bamber et al. So here I'm showing the daily mean simulated fields for from a 1-year prognostic simulation, sea surface salinity and currents on the left, SSD in the middle, and sea ice cover. And given that this is a prognostic simulation, we think our results so far are encouraging in that the model is able to capture the general, spatial, and seasonal variations in the hydrography and circulation of this region. But there are some problems, and I'm going to focus today on one of those problems, which is the underestimation of sea ice in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So we are testing several modifications, but I will talk about two of them today. One is the nudging of sea surface heat and salt fluxes, where the nudging terms are proportional to the difference between the simulated sea surface temperature or salinity and external values. And for external values, we are using daily reanalysis. And the second modification we are testing is a set of changes to the model configuration. The main change is a change in the horizontal tracer advection scheme from the default third order scheme to a fourth order scheme. And the other changes were made in order to make the model behave well with the fourth order tracer advection scheme. And so because I'm focusing on sea ice in the Gulf here I'm showing the monthly mean simulated temperature and salinity at the AZMP Septil transect in the Northwest Gulf during February of 2014. And on the left, I'm showing glorious reanalysis for reference. And in the control run, because we're using a third order advection scheme for tracers, the simulated fields are very smooth, which is both an advantage and a drawback of using the scheme. And then when I nudge the surface heat and freshwater fluxes, we do see some difference near the surface, which might be clearer if I show the difference. So with the surface flux nudging, the near surface waters are colder and fresher as expected, but the difference is not that huge. Whereas when I change the model configuration, we do see a much more dramatic change in the vertical structure of temperature and salinity, even though I'm not applying any nudging. And so if I go back, when I applied changes to the model configuration, the resulting vertical structure of the temperature and salinity is at least qualitatively more similar to the reanalysis than in the other two runs. So then looking at the sea ice cover in the middle of that same month, when we look at the control run, there's very little ice in the Gulf, whereas the sea ice charts indicate that there's at least 90% sea ice cover in most of the Gulf. And then with the surface fluxes nudged, there's a bit more ice, but not a whole lot more. And then with the model configuration changed, there is the sea ice cover is still underestimated compared to the sea ice chart, but it is a lot more than in the other two runs. So the next step will be to combine these two changes. I've just started working on that, but I don't have any results to show yet. And so, the thing is, we would like to see how the nudging of the surface fluxes will affect a model run in which the vertical structure is already different. And this slide from Cacciafano's group is just to show that the VGC module is performing well. They apply nudging to reanalysis and observations for the physical variables as well as some of the VGC variables. And they find that the model does perform well. Both the nudged and prognostic variables perform well in comparison to the observations made during the AR7W cruises. So to conclude, our preliminary results indicate that both the nudging of surface fluxes and changing the model configuration can result in improved model performance. So as I said, the next step will be to combine these two changes. And our group is also testing other things like smooth bathymetry and reduced vertical mixing in an attempt to improve the model performance. And as we move into longer hindcast, model drift will become a problem in addition to model bias. So we will need to implement additional measures such as the semi-prognostic method. We also need to quantify the model performance. And work has started on implementing higher resolution grids nested within our current domain. And that will be the topic of Shemu's presentation during this Congress. And there will be several other presentations during this Congress related to this model or different versions of it, including the very next talk. So I will leave this up here and stop here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyoko. With 6 minutes remaining for questions. I think we have quite a lot of time. I don't see anything in the chat yet.
Greg
Fred?
Smith has his hand raised.
Yeah, I got a question,
Okay,
Fred,
go
if
ahead.
that's all right. Yeah, thanks for that, Kyoko. I had sort of a comment and a question. I mean, the first comment is you're using the Glory's reanalysis as a reference. I mean, the issue there is that Glory's, they have neither tides nor an accurate representation of the interannual variability of the runoff from the St. Lawrence River. So it might be helpful to use something that's a little bit more accurate. There's also not a lot of in situ data for them to assimilate to really correct for all of those things. So, I mean, you might want to use some of the, the operational outputs we have, or there's various different other higher resolution models that might be more accurate. My other comment was about the vertical mixing. So you mentioned improving the vertical mixing. I didn't catch it earlier on, but I was wondering what vertical mixing scheme you're using, because I know that we found when we were first doing some NEMO East Coast runs that using the one equation TKE scheme, that we had some very significant errors in the ice cover, and that we really needed to have a K epsilon scheme.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I decided to use the reanalysis as a preference, largely because I had it on hand already as model input. And we did make some comparisons with the CMOS satellite for observations. And Christoph, who will be talking next, has made comparisons across Davis Strait with the observations collected by Elizabeth Curry's group at UWashington. So yes, we do plan to look at other data sets for comparison. And for vertical mixing, we have been using the Miller-Yamada scheme. And that was largely because we used it previously when we used to work with the Princeton Ocean model. And we did try other vertical mixing schemes earlier, and the model became unstable. But we found that when we switched the tracer mixing from mixing along geopotentials to mixing along isopycnals, the model becomes more stable with the fourth order tracer advection scheme. So I've been thinking of revisiting different vertical mixing schemes. And what I meant here when I said reduced vertical mixing is to simply stay with the Miller-Yamada scheme that we are mixing, but to just artificially reduce the diffusivity. So that's something someone else in my group has been testing. And I think it has led to promising results in terms of the propagation of the estuarine scheme in the St. Lawrence system.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Fred, can I ask a question?
Yes, and I encourage actually people asking questions to switch on their camera. Yeah, so you said the model configuration change was giving the largest differences in the Gulf, and you alluded a bit to what exactly in both changes was the most important one. So can you? I think you mentioned the horizontal tracer, but is
Yes.
there anything else that was important to you?
So what we did was initially we switched from a third order to fourth order scheme for tracer advection, and we were finding that the model would be quite unstable, and there seemed to be a very narrow range of viscosity and diffusivity that will allow the model to run stably. So then we tried switching the mixing of momentum and tracers from mixing along geopotentials to mixing along terrain following layers for momentum and mixing along isopycnals for tracers. And that has allowed the model to run more stably with the fourth order tracer advection scheme. And also with the third order upstream advection scheme, we were using zero viscosity and zero diffusivity. And we switched to a Smagorinsky type viscosity, where the viscosity is dependent on the grid size and the current shear and strain. And that has also helped the model to run with the fourth order scheme. And and with the model preserving more of the eddy activity. And so we can still play a little bit with what percentage of the viscosity is diffusivity. So that's something we can still explore a little bit. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Kyoko. Yeah. Okay, so I understand that the okay, so switching from third order to fourth was initially a bit unstable until you modified the mixing scheme, basically.
Yes.
Okay,
All right.
thanks.
So I think we should probably move on, but thank you for that. So please feel free to continue discussion in the chat. So next up we have Christoph. So please go ahead and share your screen.
All right. Hello, everyone. Let me quickly share my screen here. Oops, not leave, share. Presentation. Oops, sorry. Can you see the slides?
We see them, but not in presentation mode.
Not in presentation mode. Oh, okay. Well, I might as well. In the interest of time. Sorry, I'll just leave them like this, and I can pop them through.
Yeah, this is good enough for me, actually.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. I'll be talking about bias correction and spatiotemporal scales for downscaling future projections of Northwest Atlantic circulation and sea ice. And this is basically, or this is part of the same project that Kyoko already mentioned, with the goal to use the model that Kyoko just introduced for downscaling future projections of global climate models for the Northwest Atlantic region. And before I go into the details, I think I don't have to convince any one of you that I guess everyone agrees with George Box that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And so the global climate models that we typically use for either long-range projections of the climate or also to force our regional models, they are wrong in the sense that they have limited spatial resolution, they miss certain processes, like for example, tides, and due to the parameterizations, they have inherent biases that make them wrong in a way that they are not an exact representation of reality. However, they're still useful because, for example, I mean, we all know that we can infer future changes in the large scale climate, and we can also use them for as input for dynamical downscaling. So especially for smaller scales, that's when we want to use downscaling, these become incredibly useful to force our regional ocean model. So I don't have to go into too much detail about this model because that's the same model that Kyoko just introduced. So the goal is to use this model, as mentioned, to downscale a global climate model. So it's based on the ocean modeling system ROMS, has a 1/12th of a degree grid spacing with 40 vertical levels. And the ocean model is also coupled to a biogeochemical model. And then we have coupled this model to the sea ice model size, which share the same horizontal grid as the ocean component. And we describe the ice thickness distribution with 5 different categories, where each category is divided into 7 vertical layers and 1 snow layer. And since I'm just briefly going to show this overview again of the modeling system. So on the left-hand side, we have the coupled ocean biogeochemistry model that exchanges information every 20 minutes with the sea ice model size. And the downscaling comes into play through the atmospheric and boundary forcing, here shown as dashed lines. So what Kyoko showed was a hindcast. So we use reanalysis data to force our ocean model to basically reconstruct or downscale the hindcasts. But instead of the reanalysis data, we can also use global climate models as atmospheric and boundary forcing to downscale those solutions, and then eventually perform long-range projections of the climate. Just here, to prove again that the model does approximately the right things, I'm showing a snapshot or a monthly mean for March from a hindcast from March 2009, and this just shows the monthly mean surface fields of SST and sea ice concentration on the left, and sea surface salinity on the right. And this uses the same input data as Kyoko mentioned. And what you can see is essentially that we, as Kyoko mentioned, do resolve the main features of the North Atlantic surface circulation, but we do have some issues that Kyoko pointed out with an underestimation of sea ice in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but also in the eastern Baffin Basin. However, as a first start, we want to use this model now to exchange or to swap out the reanalysis forcing and use climate model as the input to then perform both reconstructions but also future projections. As the climate model that we will use for this experiment, we will use the HADGEM 3GC3MM for various reasons. First of all, it has a fairly good spatial resolution for both the ocean model and the atmospheric model. The ocean model comes with a 1/4 degree resolution, and the atmospheric model comes on a 60-kilometer grid. And another reason why we chose this model was also data availability. While the ocean is only available as monthly means, the atmospheric variables are available on as 3 hourly values. So this will enable us to reproduce or incorporate the diurnal cycles in our model, and we don't have to be to think of anything fancy to reconstruct those from, for example, monthly means or 5-day means if we were to use those average data as atmospheric forcing. Because the question that arises then due to the coarse resolution is how do we or how important it is actually to reconstruct the smaller scales, both on the temporal and spatial domain. And I'll talk about that in a second. And just for the sake of completeness, we use the same tidal forcing for the climate simulations. And in preparation for the long range predictions, we have computed monthly climatologies for both the river runoff and the freshwater flux from the land ice, which we'll use as the surface or as freshwater forcing along the coastline. So this is where they slightly differ from the hindcasts that use interannual forcing. So the problem, as I said, or as I started, is the global model that we're going to use for to run this or to force our ocean model has inherent biases, which I'm illustrating here with the 2-meter air temperature bias, which is one of the forcing variables. And you can see that over the model domain, the HADGEM model actually has a strong positive bias in the northern model domain, and in terms of air temperature. So if you now think of this feeding this too high temperature into our ocean model, this would obviously then result in probably an overestimation of heat flux into the ocean and probably an underestimation of sea ice. So the question is, how can we best account for these biases in our forcing climate model before we feed it into the regional model to avoid a garbage in, garbage out problem? And so the questions that we're trying to ask is, what is the value of increasing complexity in bias correction? Because there's no real textbook solution to how much bias correction you actually have to do. And I'll touch on that in a bit. And then also, how do we account for missing spatial and temporal scales in the forcing? As I've mentioned, the atmospheric forcing comes on a relatively large scale. So it might be that some storms or some wind patterns may not be well represented in the climate model, and we want to try somehow to account for that in the forcing. And then last but not least, that's sort of a future research question is, how sensitive are future projections to the method of bias correction? Okay, thank you. And the approach that we are choosing is to downscale the climate simulation, which we'll then evaluate against a multi-year hindcast. But again, before we do the downscaling, we apply some bias correction against our truth, which or the fields that we consider the truth and that are atmospheric and ocean reanalysis. And due to the constraint of the data availability of all these data sets, we have to restrain ourselves to the common period of forcing data. This is all work in progress, and I wish I could show you some initial model results, but they're still running. And as you've heard from Kyoko, the model still has some few kinks that need to be ironed out. So what I'm going to show you today is sort of the approach and the simulation plan that we are that we have lined up, and I'm happy to take any suggestions of what we want to plan. And just to see what the benchmark, so to speak, is, I'm just showing here the mean biases in the climate model. Now, in our model domain, you can see that in terms of sea surface temperature, the HATGEM model has generally a cold bias and lacks some sea ice here in the Baffin Bay. So, and this is obviously something that we want to correct for once we do the downscaling, which we hope to which we hope to achieve with the higher resolution and the bias corrected forcing. So, what kind of different bias correction methods are we planning on? So these are kind of listed here in the schematic. In the top panel, you can sort of see our starting scenario where the black is what we consider the truth. So that this could be observations or the reanalysis. And then we have the pure run that would be the downscaled climate model without any bias correction. And you can see for this arbitrary forcing variable that there is a temporal bias in there, which we can correct, or the bias is both in the temporal or in the mean, so the two lines are offset, but you can also see that the variability is less. So how can we account for these differences? The easiest way is to just subtract the means. This is shown here in the second panel, which basically just shifts the blue line up, but might still or will still underestimate the temporal variability. So the next step would also be to account for differences in the standard deviation, which would then be some sort of Z-score, where you also scale up each value. And if we have to be, if this turns out to still not be sufficient, then we can apply methods that go into the frequency domain that try to recover some scales or make the bias correction frequency dependent. So this is all a plan, the plan for the future. And once we have this sort of once we've established the right method for bias correction, we can then quantify the projected changes in the ocean and mean state and variability due to climate change using these downscaled climate solution. But we can also run targeted model simulations around hypothetical past climate scenarios that would be informed by paleoceanographic observations. And one thing that I would like to look into would also be the assessment of sea ice predictability, both in the past but also the future. So if you have any comments or questions or suggestions about this, as I said, this is work in progress. Please get in touch. And I'm also happy to take any questions now. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, your remark about model being wrong raised a few eyebrows here. Greg, you want to comment on that?
Sorry, say that again.
Your comment about the models being wrong.
I don't know, Fred. We can leave that for discussion in the chat, perhaps.
Okay.
All right.
But I did have
hand raised? I think we just have 1 minute for discussion.
I do have a question if nobody else does.
No,
Okay.
nobody else at the moment. Go ahead.
So maybe just a quick question then, Chris. So I think it's a really, really important idea to take into account the biases. I was wondering if you thought at all about the, kind of a non-stationarity of the biases. in that, I mean, if you looked, for example, I mean, already in the recent period, if you looked at the biases, the representation of the biases, I don't know, in the mid 20th century, and then looked at them more recently, and you could see if there was any non-stationarity in the biases.
I haven't looked into any temporal evolution of the biases. Given that we only have these 22 years of overlapping data, it's relatively short. So this is something we have to rely on, and obviously also with the caveat that we have to assume that these biases also apply to the future, because if once we perform the future projections, then yeah, we would apply essentially the same bias correction to the future projections in the assumption that they don't change in the future.
But the data set, the forcing data set you're using, you only have 22 years of it, or you don't have?
So it's the overlap. It's the overlap. So the I think so we want to use the GLORIS data set as the truth for the ocean. That's only available since 1993. And the climate model, at least the historical runs, are only available until the end of 2014. That sort of constrains our bias correction. And I guess with 22 years, we can get, yeah, I mean, you could probably do a proper error analysis on this.
Sorry, guys, I suggest you continue that outside. We have to move on.
Sure, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. All right, so next up is Drew Peterson. So Drew, please go ahead, share your screen. It was a poster for Drew, was it? Is it like a 5-minute poster presentation?
I don't think we hear Drew. I think I see him speaking.
Yeah, so I don't see the. Are you there, Drew?
Yeah. I can see him, but it's yeah, we can't hear him at the moment.
Okay.
Can you try without your mic? And yeah, unplug it. Now you're muted.
Oh, there we go. We hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I was hoping to use a better mic, but that's okay. This is basic. Share. Okay. Sorry about the.
About 3 minutes now, Drew.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So what you're going to be looking for is this poster here to help your eyes do a little bit. I've got it on a little bit of a screen here. So.
Yeah. All I see is a plain white screen, Drew.
Oh.
So maybe in the interest of time, just give maybe just a verbal.
Okay, I think I'm going to just give a verbal. So I'm going to be talking about my poster is about building an ensemble analysis for our system here in Environment Canada. And so what I've done, and essentially the rationale for doing this is that currently in our ensemble prediction system, JEPS, the spread in the system is too small, and more precisely, the spread in the system is the spread does not represent the kind of a lot of the initial error in the system. And so it's very important to have an ensemble of initial conditions or an ensemble analysis. And so I've produced an ensemble analysis. Basically, we using the ensemble forcing that we have available from the JEPS atmosphere, as well as stochastics applied to the ocean. We can produce spread in the ocean, and so then if you so there's a few ways to do this. We picked one way where we used stochastic perturbation tendencies and stochastic parameters, as well as the fluxes. And when we do that, we do produce spread. Obviously, it's the model is still under dispersive, in that the spread is not big enough to represent the error. But on the other hand, the spread that we do get is in the right area. So it's kind of representing the error, but not to the extent we want. So we'll probably still need to increase the spread, but one thing that we will hope will be a short-term fix for this is that a lot of the error in our system currently, or the error in the system that I was looking at, was due to essentially the atmospheric forcing applied. I was applying an older version of our atmosphere, and that had some severe biases in SST. And so once we go to the latest version of the atmospheric forcing, we should decrease that error and ultimately hopefully get a better representation of our spread to error relationship. So I'll encourage you to go look at the poster. I'm sorry I couldn't show it up here. It doesn't seem to like the screen. Stop sharing. In fact, I'm going to stop sharing here.
All right. Thanks for that, Drew. So it's good. It's a teaser then. So if you want to see the poster, you're going to have to go see the poster.
Yeah, you're going to have to see the poster. I'm sorry, I can't even stop sharing now.
All right. Well, I will probably move on, but thanks for that, Drew.
Yes.
So next up, we've got Mathilde. So please go ahead, Mathilde, share your screen.
Oh, yeah, this is not my screen.
No, I can't stop.
Okay, so I also have a poster, and I guess this is a bit different to the other things that were presented in this session. It's not really on modeling, but more of an application of what you can do with models. And I chose this session just because I thought the method could interest some people. So what we do is that we use a machine learning clustering algorithm to classify some Lagrangian particles that we launch in the Labrador Current. So you can see on the map here what the Lagrangian particles look like. We use the GLORIS-12 reanalysis to have the ocean velocities to launch the particles. And this is related to another project, but the question is just to know what happens with the Labrador Current when it breaks up near the tip of the Grand Banks. And we expect to have two main branches. Some of the water will go east and feed the subpolar North Atlantic, and some water will go west and feed the Slope Sea and the Eastern American continental shelf. But it's kind of hard to quantify if we use, for example, just looking at the branches and analysis of the volume transport. So that's why we use these Lagrangian particles, and then we have like 1 million of them. So we use a machine learning algorithm to help us look at the data. We use a k-means algorithm, and we just implement it with the Python scikit-learn package, which is actually pretty easy to do. So even without much knowledge on machine learning, this can be easily applied. And it works well. Here you see some examples of clusters that the machine learning model identifies. So we find like it gathers together all the particles that go towards the subpolar North Atlantic or that feed the continental shelf, or also the ones that enter Belle-Île Strait and more. So if you want to see all the pathways that we identify, you can come and see the poster. And I mean, then how can this be useful? Well, it's good because we can confirm or identify the main pathways, but then, for example, we can also do a time series of the variability of the magnitude of each of the pathways. Here you see the reflected ones and the ones feeding the Slope Sea that are really anti-correlated. So it makes sense, but it's still interesting. And I also put the Belle-Île contribution, for which we also find some variability. So we can use that then to try to understand the mechanisms that control this variability, which is quite strong. Like you can see here for the particles that retroflect, we go from 30% of the particles to like 60. This is actually, sorry, this is there is a running mean, but we actually go from 6% to 42% of the particles. So yeah, so that's it. So if you want more details, you can come and see the poster.
Thank you, Mathilde. There's 1 minute and more for questions.
Maybe best, Fred, just to save the questions for the poster, and we could maybe add that for the poster session, I believe it's this afternoon. Mm-hmm. So please feel free to go check out those posters and the others as well.
There was a message just recently, actually, that all the posters will be presented in the Gavathon app.
Yeah, okay, that's an excellent idea. So looking forward to that. Great way to end the week here. All right, so we should move on then. So the next presentation was originally by Clark, but I believe Clark can't be here today, so we have Paul stepping in.
Yes, I will be giving the presentation for Clark. Clark's sitting on a houseboat in an isolated island in Northern California right now with no email or internet, so he's unable to present it. So I'll be giving this, and it's really just an update of some of the NEMO work that we're doing at the University of Alberta, as well as then discussions on the NEMO forum. I'll point out this is more on the model development side. Some of the actual science are going to be presented by different people. There's good for students, for example, looking at Labrador Sea, Overturning Pune is going to be speaking later today. Adam, Taya, Yarisbel, so my other group members are also going to be speaking, and Inga are going to be speaking later in this Congress with some of the different science results, but this is more of a on the technical side. So we're going to talk about Yo-Yo in his initial comment talked about us running Arctic and Atlantic. That's been our main workhorse for the last going on to 10 years, but we've now actually started running global configurations, so we can actually look at some additional questions that we couldn't just looking at the Arctic and Atlantic. With AGRIF, we'll talk about our Labrador 60 some more. We'll talk about updated 1/12 configurations in the Arctic and Atlantic. Our work towards actually running a 1/60th degree Arctic after the successes we've had with the Labrador Sea at 1/60th. And then I'll talk a bit about the Canadian NEMO Forum, which is something that's, I think, relevant to a lot of people doing modeling, coming out of some work of the Mayo Pars Prediction Core. So globally, we, as well as our ANA configuration, we've started running the eORCA 025. We're running it right, and we're doing this in part because we want to look at Bering Strait inflow impacts of the Arctics and then downstream some of those questions, but also to test some of the model development. Right now, we're running it in NEMO 3.6, but we're also setting it up to run with NEMO 4.2, and we're in the process of getting that working. We're using this to do some tests. We're doing experiments to look at the representation of runoff, for example, Dian trend birth, the Great Rivers approach versus forcing with a hydrological model, such as the Swedish height model run out right now at the University of Calgary, as well as Jonathan Bamber's iceberg simulation, different atmospheric forcing, icebergs, testing LIM 2, LIM 3, when we get 4.2, SI 3. And also here, we'll be testing tides. We've been using TPX, like some of the others have been talking about, Bling, and then we're going to carry this into NEMO 4.2. And just as a sort of pretty movie, and I think especially for someone like Juliana, who's so interested in icebergs, here you're just showing iceberg trajectories globally. So we can see, obviously, things we've looked at long-term, exchange in the Labrador Sea, the importance of Baffin Bay, recirculation at Cape Farewell. But there's also some very interesting patterns in the Southern Ocean for icebergs that, you know, we're probably going to start to look at in the near future. Right now, it's just really just a pretty movie to show associated with the fact that we're running things globally. There'll be a lot more on this when these runs are more complete and we have some more understanding of what's being represented well and what's not. In terms of the high resolution work, this is something we've been running over the last few years and running additional experiments, because this is, I think, given us some of the most interesting results we've had, is our triple nest in the Labrador Sea. So our normal ANA 4 configuration. Going back to Yo-Yo's talk, I definitely suggest 7 north and 26, so you're farther away from rapid. 12th degree subpolar gyre than 1/60th Labrador Sea, so we're talking about 1 to 1.5 kilometer resolution, 75 levels. And we've actually now working on our third 1/60th Labrador Sea, so we can do sensitivity. We originally forced it with the GDPS. For various reasons, we actually ended up with too much stratification, shutting down the convection, switched to DFS, and over more recent years, ERA5. And we're also running now an experiment without Greenland melt to really understand what happens on the shelf basin exchange, the role of that Greenland melt. because of 1/60th actually representing the Rossby radius and doing a really good job of some of the shelf basin exchange. And to think about what can be done, I've got two movies here. The left is the integrated freshwater content over the upper couple hundred meters in the model. The right is a tracer proportional to the Greenland melt. On the right, again, this is just for showing details, but they really show at 1/60th, you can see a lot of the significant eddy exchange mixing in the Northern Labrador Sea. Runs with and without Greenland melt have some differences. Interesting for long term, and I think related to Mathilde's presentation and something I know she said she was talking about, we're also interested. If you look at, let me restart that, you can really see interesting behavior along the branch of the Labrador Current, where the fresh water is going offshore, the different sort of eddy exchanges at different parts, and these are something we're going to be looking at more detail, the role of then what happens around the northwest corner. So 1/60th definitely adds a lot of interesting behavior. As I said in a couple of talks, Pune is going to talk about how we get much better overturning at OSNAP. For our 1/12th, which is a good
Paul, you have extended your time. Sorry, Paul, you have extended your time.
I haven't hit 15 minutes yet, have I?
Oh, we're not in a poster anymore.
I'm not a poster. No, I'm a talk.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, the next two were talks as well after me. So yeah, we've started work on a new 1/12th degree, because again, you talked about for resolving a lot of the process in the archipelago, Hudson Bay. Our old version was 3.4. We're running now with 3.6. Icebergs, tidal mixing, 9 constituents from TPX. Starting a bit farther back, we've got LIM 3. Actually, we've got twin LIM 2 and LIM 3 experiments to look at the role of that, the sea ice model, 5 constituents for the ice, etc. And we've embedded a number of passive tracers so we can look at where the Greenland runoff goes, the archipelago outflow, river exchange, Atlantic water. And at the moment, I've just got the first year of output, and you got all the tracers combined, just sort of different things, but you can sort of see the inflow routes of Pacific water, pathways of Mackenzie and other river waters, where some of the water coming out of the Northwest Passage is going, where some of the Labrador Sea water is dispersing. These are all long-term questions we're going to want to look at once we've got 20 plus years at the 1/12 model with all the bells and whistles that we put in this version compared to our previous one. For what we're working on next is, given the success that I said we had with Labrador Sea at 1/60th, looking at all those small scale processes, even though it's going to be expensive as anything, we're going to run the entire Arctic Ocean at 1/60th degree. So around 1/2 to 1 kilometer, 1993 to present, tides, icebergs, etc. We've estimated on Niagara and Quebec, Canada, we're going to need about 8,000 cores, and it's going to take close to 2+ years to run. But I think in the long run, it's going to be some really interesting results that can be mined for a long time. It's now actually running. It's been spun up. We're starting to get there, but it hasn't run long enough. We've got any exciting figures or videos yet. But that's, I guess, next CMOS, hopefully I'll have more to show about that. The other thing I want to talk about, and this is coming out of Mayopar and the Prediction Core and NEMO, is the creation of a Canadian NEMO forum that Bill Merrifield and I proposed to try to help bring the Canadian NEMO users together, get more links between some of the concepts people and the government and the academic community. So we're actually working on setting up a forum that will eventually have a calendar of all NEMO related events, lists of all the institutions that use it. There'll be requests to share data, code output, links to GitHub repositories. Really, we're trying to build and increase collaboration in NEMO. At the moment, we've got 2 universities, Alberta and Manitoba. Thank you, Juliana, for putting our abstract in. And also thank Susan Allen, because we took a lot of ideas she used with her website. But we're trying to put a simple way to make it easy for the community, and including those who are non-modelers, to access model data and move forward. So we'll have got it set up so people can, look at data sets, model development, codes, documents, posters, all sorts of things. And so we have listed some of the stuff we've got from our experiments, right down to initial movies and that, streaming that. So again, trying to help and work towards improved communication. The NEMO Forum has also got a goal to put a white paper together to discuss what is the state of NEMO modeling in Canada, as well as eventually have bi-monthly seminars. So hopefully we'll be sending out emails about that soon, and hopefully be able to train a lot more people. But as well, so that's one of the activities going forward. So I'll stop here. I think we've got some exciting developments going on with the NEMO models we're directly using, and then I think as well the work for collaboration I think will be valuable to many people. So I will stop here.
Thanks, Bob. There's 3 minutes for discussions. Actually, a little more, I think. We start at 35 for the next one, so maybe even more. Okay. Is there any hand raised, Dave?
No, I don't see any.
I see there's a bunch of questions in the chat. I'll try to answer them as we go through the remaining talks.
Yeah, Greg had a question for you about sharing the configuration.
That's the goal. That's what we really want to be able to share is configuration files, forcing files, subroutines for doing exotic aspects. Yeah, so that is the goal. And we're starting to get it set up. We're sharing a lot of our stuff, and if others are willing to volunteer, and I'll send out some requests for that. Yes.
And I should mention that the Susan actually started a group discussion in NEMO some years ago on Slack. And,
yeah, there will be there's a Slack channel as well. Yeah, we're going to take advantage of everything that exists, not reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, it hasn't been used heavily in the last years, unfortunately. But I encourage people to. I don't have a link with me at the moment, so. Oh, you have a hand raised. So
Apologies for a quick one. So the NEMO 4 vertical coordinate, and do you have when you think about sea level or the more hybrid, more complex? What's in your mind?
That I think is going to be an interesting question. We haven't really got to the point of deciding how we're going to deal with that yet. So I'm open to a discussion on that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
And Greg?
Hi, Paul. I was just curious about your 60th degree configurations. That's very interesting, the animation showing and whatnot. I was wondering if you'd, how the configuration differed from Julien de Samé's NATL 60. If you'd had a look at comparing
there
the two
is
at all.
We talked with Julien when we set it up. He suggested a number of parameters. The NATL 60 is only run for 1 year because they were looking at it for specific aspects. We've got a longer. They have tides in that because we're using AGRIF. We don't have tides in the Lab 60. We will have tides in the Arctic 60. Same thing. Camille Leak setting up a new Arctic 60th as well. We've shared. I'd say there's 99% the same, and there's the small individual choices here or there, but we've definitely communicated.
Okay.
Okay, Greg, your hand's still raised.
And I think in the discussion, I think Goa said it right. EORCA 025 is just add some extension to get better representation for the ice sheets and that around Antarctica at the very southern end, which is why it's the extended ORCA 025.
Okay. Can I ask Susan? She can put the link to the Slack discussion group in this chat. Yeah, I don't have it on my computer. And so I've seen. I was reviewing a paper about SI Cube recently, and it looks very promising. I mean, it's very on par with the CIC now, apparently. So it's very good news for NEMO 4 in general. But in our case, I think we still stick with size, and it still has a little more physics.
Hey, Fred, I mean, you say SI cubed is like size. So is it more akin to size 6 though, or size 4?
Depending on the parameterization used, it's I think they're diverging. Yeah, let's say they started from size 4 and they're diverging. I don't think they have a multi-layer physics, and but they have their own snow physics parameterization, which seems to be well improved compared to the simple one we have in size. So I mean, it's not the same thing for sure. It's diverging. So at some point there will be need for convergence.
All right, well, we should probably move on to next talk then.
Yeah.
So thanks to Paul and for filling in for Clark. Feel bad for him lost on his houseboat out there, enjoying himself. All right, so next up we've got Juliana. So please go ahead, share your screen.
Share. Can you see that?
We do, yes. Perfect.
Okay. Okay. So hi everyone. I'm Juliana. I was actually spawned from Paul's group a while ago, so we still keep close collaboration. You'll see some similarities here in the talks. But what I've been really looking into is the iceberg module in NEMO. So that's one of my favorite aspects. And today what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about some preliminary results from an analysis where I'm checking the role of icebergs as freshwater carriers across the Davis Strait. So today I'm assistant professor at the University of Manitoba. And I just want to acknowledge that the university is located on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. All right, so move forward here if I can. There we go. So here I have this schematic that shows the ocean circulation around Davis Strait. So we can see the West Greenland current flowing northward with its several recirculation branches, and the southward flowing Baffin Island current. So we know that in general, the net volume transport across Davis Strait is southward. And this southward transport is very important because it brings lots of fresh water towards the Labrador Sea, which is a region of deep convection. Now, although most of this fresh water that is brought southwards is coming from the Arctic, another important source of fresh water there is the Greenland Ice Sheet. And now, since the Greenland Ice Sheet, the Greenland ice mass discharge is about 50% solid in the solid form, and that means mostly calving of icebergs. I was curious to know what is the contribution of icebergs to Davis Strait freshwater flux. So in terms of the model, I'm not going to go much deep here in details, but here's the configuration I use from Paul's group, NF4. It's a quarter degree regional domain, as you can see in this figure. And what I do want to show is this is the solid discharge around Greenland, which is provided by Bamber's data set from 2018. And in the model, we represent the solid portion of the discharge as icebergs. And here in this map, what you can see is the solid discharge, and the bigger the bubble, the bigger is the solid discharge in that particular region. So if you have any questions or want to know a little bit more about
model configuration or the iceberg module, please either send me an email or put a question in the chat. So this first plot here is showing the freshwater flux across Davis Strait. Negative values represent net southward flux of freshwater. The blue line is showing liquid freshwater, so the total liquid freshwater crossing the Davis Strait, and it is relative to this left y-axis here. And then we have this gray plot here, which shows the contribution of iceberg melt. So we track that through a passive tracer in the model. And the red portion there is the solid flux of freshwater. So how much the icebergs are carrying freshwater around across the strait. And both the gray and the red are relative to the right y-axis there. So the first thing that we notice is that the freshwater flux associated with icebergs is 1 order of magnitude smaller than the total freshwater flux. And that's not super surprising, since we know that most of the freshwater that crosses the strait comes from the Arctic, and just a smaller portion is really coming from the Greenland Ice Sheet. The other thing that I want to point out is that we see a marked seasonality for the iceberg transport of freshwater. And this seasonality is slightly different from what you see for the blue line. It peaks in late fall and during winter, as you can see here. And I will soon try to offer there some explanation on what is forcing this seasonality of the iceberg transport of freshwater. Okay, so keeping in mind the general circulation around Baffin Bay that is here represented in this blue arrow, those blue arrows there, one would expect that the icebergs that are crossing Davis Strait southwards here on the side are probably coming from the central west sector of Greenland, the northwest, and the north sectors of Greenland. And when you plot the origin of the icebergs that are crossing southwards, indeed, that's what you see. So there are no surprises here. Most of the icebergs that are crossing the strait southwards come from the northwest sector. But then if you look at and think about what would you expect the icebergs crossing northwards in the strait, where they would be coming from, to my mind, they would be coming from like the east, the east sectors of Greenland, or especially the southwest sector. But when you do the same pie chart for the northward particles or icebergs, actually, like the icebergs that are coming from those 3 sectors there are just around 20% of the icebergs crossing northwards. And most of the icebergs crossing northwards are coming from the north of Davis Strait, which is sort of weird, right? So the icebergs that are crossing towards north are coming from the central west and northwest, and a little bit from the north as well. So that made me curious what is exactly going on there. So what I did was to look more into the trajectory of the icebergs, and I was not as smart as Matilda here that used a machine learning approach to check the trajectory patterns, although we did chat a while ago, and I'm hoping to use the cluster analysis as well to detect iceberg trajectories, so that is still come. But for now, what I have is what I got from just looking at thousands of iceberg trajectory plots, which was exhausting. But here are some examples of what I saw. So the first one is just, what you would expect, icebergs following the boundary currents there. And they usually follow the shelf break, especially here in the Baffin Island. Then you also see some other branches that they follow, so some known recirculations and other circulation features like some smaller gyres. They also enter in straits. And then 3 features of the trajectories caught my attention. One of them is this sort of loop that you see here. So lots of icebergs do this sort of loop. It might not be this big, and it might not be centered here in Baffin Bay. It might be a little bit northwards here. But what they do have in common is the seasonality. So what you see is that when you have late fall, winter, and sea ice is growing, the icebergs are moving straight southwards, right? And then once sea ice start to melt, icebergs just change their minds and say, nope, I'm going northwards now. So northwards they go, and then as soon as late fall, winter is there again, then the icebergs go back to traveling southwards. So this is probably a hint that this sea ice is the main forcing involved in pushing these icebergs across Davis Strait during late fall and winter. So when sea ice is growing is when it can push the icebergs southward of Davis Strait. So that's my best guess of what's driving that seasonality there, but I still will do some more analysis on that. The second feature is this recirculation that you see on top of Davis Strait. So this is an explanation of why you have icebergs that are calved north of Davis Strait, crossing northwards. So they're just going southwards and then recirculating here, crossing back northwards, just on top of Davis Strait. And another thing to consider here is that why there are not many icebergs coming from the southwest sector of Greenland and crossing northwards. There was the latest International Ice Patrol report showed that indeed in real life you see what they call an iceberg gap here in the southwest. So they don't see many icebergs in this region usually, and they attribute that to wave erosion, which is an important mechanism to disintegrate icebergs. So they think that because this is a very energetic spot there, the icebergs just don't survive for too long in that region. And if you look into the output of the model, indeed you see a smaller concentration of particles of icebergs in that same region. So I still haven't looked into what are the rates of melting, iceberg melting here, but I'm certainly going to look at that. And we do represent wave erosion in our model. So that's a possibility as well that is going to give us the same result as what is being seen by the International Ice Patrol. The third feature that I saw that I thought it was interesting is that icebergs calving here from the central west, instead of just following with the west Greenland current, as I would expect, they are just crossing Davis Strait southwards. And this was puzzling at first, but then if we can think about 2 things, one of them is that I still have to check, but I think most of the icebergs that are doing that are actually smaller, so they are also being forced by winds, right? But we also see in Riesgaard et al. 2020 that there is some evidence of a coastal current here also going southward. So this might be an indication that the icebergs are a good indicator of the upper circulation of the ocean.
Juliana, you have 1 minute left. Can you go to conclusion?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm going to plot observations according to seasons, just to see if the model is doing a good job. And so here I'm going to just put my key points here, if you want to read through them. And I just want to mention some shortcomings. One of them is the lack of the representation of the footloose mechanism in our model. So Huth and previously others as well have shown that this mechanism that sort of breaks the iceberg whenever you have this sort of foot that causes instability in the iceberg, they break the icebergs faster than we see in the model. So that means that our icebergs might be living longer than they should. The second shortcoming is that we have a generalized size distribution for icebergs. It's not particular to Greenland. And the last one is that in this particular resolution, as you can see here from this figure, there are no fjords being represented. So the icebergs are spawned already in open ocean. And we know that lots of mass of icebergs are lost still inside the fjord. So we also might be overestimating the amount of solid ice that is reaching open ocean. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juliana. And I apologize, but I think we don't have time for questions. So we'll move to the next talk.
Next up, we have Pune, looking at the impact of model resolution on the MOC. So please go ahead and share your screen.
Hi, sure. Just a moment. Can you see my screen now? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Pune Hoshiar. I'm a first-year PhD student at the University of Alberta, and I'm doing my PhD with Paul Myers. Today, I'm going to talk about the impact of model resolution on the simulated MOC across West-Now-West section. Okay. Atlantic Marginal Overturning circulation is an idealized picture of the global ocean circulation along north-south axis, in which warm and salty surface flowing waters are transformed into colder and fresh waters due to air sea fluxes and interaction with Arctic waters to flow south at depth. Climate change has been attributed to MOC variability, and MOC variability traditionally has been attributed to formation of water masses in the Labrador Sea interior. The Labrador Sea, which is located here between Canada and Greenland, is an important region for us, and it's predisposed to deep convection and formation of water masses in its interior. And Labrador Sea water is part of the water masses of North Atlantic, and also approximately 30% of subpolar North Atlantic water ventilates in the Labrador Sea. So Labrador Sea is a significant region to investigate. This basin is affected by multiple current systems. As you can see here, East Greenland Current and Inner Current emergent from West Greenland Current, which cyclonically turns into Labrador Sea and Baffin Bay. And we have also outflow from Davis Straits and Hudson Straits. The American convert Labrador Current, which goes southward. For overturning analysis, I used OSNAP observational study, and this study starts because the overturning variability wasn't current between subtropical and subpolar latitudes, so it increases the interest in a complementary measure of overturning circulation to directly assess the link between deep water formation and overturning variability. OSNAP observational study stands for overturning in the subpolar North Atlantic program. This observational study includes two sections, OSNAP West and OSNAP East. which was now west, is the focus of my study, and it extends from the southeastern Labrador Shelf to southwestern tip of Greenland, and OSNAP is southeastern tip of Greenland to Scottish Shelf. The observer system includes OSNAP mooring array, which can directly measure the temperature, salinity, and velocity fields, dynamic height moorings that used for estimating the geostrophic flows, glider surveys, and subsurface acoustic track floats that used to trace the pathways of overflow waters in the basin. This study starts in August 2014, to April 2016, and then extends to May 2018. It was a good period to study this region because the first 2 winters produced strong cooling in western subpolar North Atlantic that resulted in mixed layer depths in the Labrador Sea. Mach is defined as the maximum of the overturning stream function density space, which is the maximum of the integration of the velocity field normal to OSNAP section from the west to east and from the top to all density surfaces. Essentially, the Mach in density space measures the transformation of less dense waters to more dense waters that occurs forward of the OSNAP line. For overturning analysis, I used 3 different model configurations: ANO4, ANO12, and Lab60. ANO4 has the horizontal resolution 1/4 degree, and it has 50 vertical levels. ANO12 1/12 degree and 50 vertical levels as well. Lab60 horizontal resolution includes 1/4 degree with 1/12 degree nesting in the North Atlantic subpolar region, and additional inner nest with 1/60 degree in the Labrador Sea with 75 vertical levels. Here you can see the Mach time series in density space. For ANO4, ANO12, the green one is Lab60, and the dark red is observational from observational data. The dashed line shows the mean Mach, and as you can see, the Lab60, the computed Mach from high resolution model Lab60 agrees very well with the calculated Mach from observational data. And here I put the Mach time series for the whole run time of the models. For the next step, I'm interested to investigate how atmospheric forcing can impact the Mach variability in high resolution model, how Mach variability can be related to eddy activity around the Labrador Sea, and how eddies and instabilities of Labrador current control the stratification in the Labrador Sea. Here I presented interesting views of Lab60 simulation results, vorticity, mixed layer depths, and convective energy. Hopefully it will work properly. Okay, yes. A strongly stratified column of water corresponds to high convective energy values. And the thing that I should mention here, that deep mixed layer in the first 2014 to 2016, we have, it's clear that we have deep convection here. Let's start it again. In 2014, it would be clear then. Yeah. And the convective energy movie shows that the East Greenland current and Inver current keeps the eddies in this region strongly stratified, and look at the Labrador current eddies here. Generally, in the later years, 2017 and 2018, it seems that Labrador Sea is getting more stratified with more fresh water in it. And the vorticity field gets a little bit weaker, and convection, it's shift from here to this region. In sum, Lab 16 mod with density space calculation performs very well. And at the end, I want to thank Paul and Clark for the movies and their help, and thank you all for your attention. And please don't hesitate if you have to ask if you have any questions. Thank you. That was it.
Thanks very much for that. I don't know, do you see any questions, David or Fred?
None visible.
I mean, I had one little question in the chat that Paul answered, but maybe you'd like to comment on as well. It was just, I noticed when you're showing the location of the OSNAP West line, that it was slightly adjacent to the AR7 West line, which, you know, for which we have, you know, a long observational set. And so I was curious as to why that was different. And Paul had mentioned that it is related to the area of deep convection. So I wonder along those lines, then it's quite useful having the AR7 West there as well, that you could use for validation of that.
Yeah, sure.
Is that something that's in your plans?
Sorry, I couldn't
Is that
get.
in your plans as well, to also use the AR7 West data for evaluation?
I use OSNAP West section for evaluation my overturning analysis. This slide.
Yeah, but then in terms of the, like, say, the representation of the deep convection, you could use the AR7 West line data, perhaps.
This section, you mean?
No, the west, the black line on the west, AR7 West.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure. I use this for overturning verification, but I didn't check AR7 line data for evaluation yet. I can check it.
Are there any other questions? Fred or David, you see anything?
I don't see any other questions. No.
Okay, perhaps we can adjourn then. So thanks again to all the speakers and to those involved in the chat and the discussion. We'll adjourn for a few hours. I guess roughly 3 hours from now, we'll come back for part 2. So hope to see you all then. And that, I guess we can close down the session.